Well, as of right now, the governor of Saudi Arabia is denying any involvement in the disappearance and the likely murder of the Washington Post columnist who disappeared after entering a Saudi consulate in Turkey to get a document. We don't know what happened to him, they're saying. But tonight, the Saudis reportedly are considering admitting that the journalist was, in fact, killed. Trace Gallagher has more on this developing story. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Tucker. In fact, there are now multiple reports the Saudi government is putting together an explanation to acknowledge that Jamal Khashoggi was killed during an interrogation that went wrong, and that the real intent was to abduct Khashoggi and bring him back to Saudi Arabia. The goal for this new narrative is to absolve Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of responsibility by giving him plausible deniability. In other words, saying the Crown Prince didn't order the killing. But analysts point out for the past 2 weeks, Saudi Arabia has denied having anything to do with Khashoggi's disappearance, even when there was video of Khashoggi entering the Saudi consulate in Istanbul but then never leaving. Turkish authorities also reportedly have audio and video evidence that Khashoggi was killed inside the consulate, though that information has not been released. And then there's the matter of 2 Saudi planes arriving in Turkey the day Khashoggi disappeared, carrying 15 members of what many have described as a hit team. Those men were waiting at the consulate for Khashoggi's arrival, and Turkish investigators believe they killed him, dismembered him, and took his body away. President Trump said a short time ago he is aware of reports that Saudi Arabia may claim Khashoggi's death was unintended, though Mr. Trump could not confirm that statement. Tucker.
Trace Gallagher, thanks for that update. Here to bring us more is Mark Stein. So, Mark, it's hard, call me naive, but it's hard for me to believe that a primitive desert theocracy that beheads its critics in public squares would hurt one of its critics who works at the Washington Post. Were you shocked by this story?
Well, I think you may be doing them a bit of a disservice there, Tucker. I mean, according to the Turks, they actually flew in an expert in bone sawing just before this man entered the consulate, and as the Saudis are now preparing to say, was accidentally questioned to death. Awfully sorry, it could happen to anybody. You could wander into the Swedish consulate, it might happen to you. I mean, that's just the way it is. The only mystery here is why, if the Turks, who claim to have basically seen all this stuff going on in the hours beforehand, why they haven't actually released it. And there is actually a kind of Turkish-Saudi feud that this particular reporter was very much on the Turkish side of. But other than that, you know, you're right. This is one of the most bloodthirsty regimes on earth. It's basically ISIS with diplomatic recognition. The only entertainment in Riyadh on a Friday are the beheadings in Chop Chop Square, and regardless of liberalization and all the rest of it, this is how they deal with their perceived enemies. So
I'm confused, though, about the media coverage of this. And by the way, I think American journalists have a right to be upset that a guy who wrote for the Post was apparently dismembered in a Saudi consulate. But the Saudis also may have had, and there's evidence that they did, advanced knowledge of 9/11. And they've funded madrasas across the Islamic world that have dramatically increased the incidence of terrorism. No one ever says that. But they're very upset about this. Are we missing the larger story here, maybe?
Yes, I think so. This particular reporter, in fact, before he arrived in America, he was very close to Prince Turki, who was the Saudi intelligence chief and later the ambassador in London and Washington. My connection to Prince Turki is that he once said, "The arrogance of Mark Stein knows no bounds," which I liked so much I had it put as the endorsement on the front cover of my next book. But you mentioned 9/11. Prince Turki stepped down as Saudi intelligence chief 10 days before 9/11. This guy Khashoggi, who's the nephew of the biggest and most celebrated Saudi arms dealer of his generation, this guy Khashoggi, before he fell out with the Saudi royal family, was Prince Turki's biggest buddy. This is one of those, you know, there are no real, he doesn't deserve to be chopped up in a consulate, but there are no good guys in this story.
That is such a good point. So quickly, with all